Uh, Thank you for your invitation and for allowing me to be at your seminar. I would like to talk about Sykes-Picot agreement, but I would first cast some light about the Arab region prior to that period. So it is possible to say roughly that the Arab highest time in history was made during the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties, which ended in 1258 with the Tatar invasion to Baghdad. The invaders burned the city and threw into the river the biggest library in the world, in one of the most tragic massacres for the written storage of human knowledge and history. However, in reality, and since 847, the state was in continuous disintegration. The inter-religious conflicts and the continuous rebelling against the state was increasing all the time, which made the state in its last centuries a nominal state with a weak grip on its territory. The last Abbasid caliphates from the 9th century and until its tragic fall by the Tatar were rather nominal rulers. The real power was shifted between the Persians, the Seljuk, and the Buwayyi dynasties. The Abbasids, who survived the Tatar massacre, moved to Cairo and continued to be nominal rulers as before. And the Mamluk was interested in them because they needed some religious legitimacy in a region where religion is the prime provider of legitimacy. However, the Mamluks ruled Egypt and Syria from 1261 until the Ottoman invasion in 1515. So one can say with a great confidence that the last 1,000 years Arabs have been absent from ruling themselves. This must have impact on Arabs in later period, as we shall see. When Arab encountered Europe in the 19th century and early 20th centuries, they had no experience in politics and in diplomacy. They were still living in the culture of the sultanic pre-modern state. In 1516, the Ottomans invaded the region, defeating the Mamluk rulers of the region. The whole Arab-speaking region except Morocco fell under the Ottoman rule. This was acceptable by Arabs due to religious basis. The Ottoman invaders are Muslims and the main bulk of Arabs are Muslims. And the Ottoman adopted the Hanafite Islamic jurisprudence. Other schools of Islamic jurisprudence require the ruler to be an Arab and a descendant from the Prophet Muhammad family. The Hanafite principles enables non-Arab Muslims and not necessary from the Prophet Muhammad Quraysh family to be rulers. This is not, however, equal to say that the Ottoman rule was totally free of problems in the Arab region. There were some revolts against them, led by local princes in Syria in the 16th and the 18th century, and the unrest was increasing. The state was getting weakened and even called the sick man of Europe. It's difficult to say that these revolts were driven by Arab ethnic awareness. Rather, It was some spontaneous reaction to the increasing of oppression and injustice in the Ottoman state. Even the successful offensive made by Muhammad Ali, the Albanian ruler of Egypt, against the Ottoman Empire was more likely motivated by personal ambition than Arab awareness, despite some Western vague reports which describe it as a sort of Arab awareness. However, the 19th century Arabs continued to live as they used to live without any radical change in their life on all levels, politically, socially, and economically. But this situation gradually changed due to the encounter with the West, which resulted in the Arab realization of their stagnation and raised major questions like the question of Prince Shakib Arsalan: why did the West advance and the Muslims did not? This was indeed a major question which was raised in the Arab Enlightenment era. In this context, it's difficult to ignore the impact of the French campaign 1799, led by Napoleon Bonaparte, as the Egyptian thinker Anwar Abdel Malik notes, towards awakening the feeling of Arab identity among Egyptians and Arabs in general. The campaign, in his view, represents the first direct encounter between the Orient and the West, which resulted in the awareness of Egyptians and Arabs to the huge scientific gap between the Orient and the West. In his view, some attribute the awakening of the revolutionary ideas for the French Revolution brought by the invading army, while others retain the consciousness to the resistance of the Arabs to the foreign invaders, or probably both factors. We need here to mention that Napoleon was the first European leader who proposed the return of Jews to Palestine. In his letter published in the Paris Moniteur Universal, he called upon Jews to restore back what is taken from them by force, and France will support them. This declaration was perhaps the beginning of Western vision about Palestine and the region. This vision, as happened later, developed in the form of Western political projects especially after the First World War, when Germany and the Ottoman Empire lost the war and the Allied forces of Britain and France occupied the Arab region of the former Ottoman state. The Arab Renaissance in the 19th century contributed greatly towards the Arab consciousness about their identity and about the importance to modernize Arab society. It was indeed a period of soul-searching where many issues were debated, such as the formation of pan-Arab thinking, about modern states, the question of education, the question of women, the Arab unity, etc. And the outcome of the Arab Enlightenment period was that Arabs realized that their defeats in the past is not only because of the lack of modern military arms, but rather that the whole Arab system, political system, does not fit anymore to modern times. The general Arab attitudes towards the West were very positive that period, due to the perception that the West established states based on law and respect to human rights and humanity. Arabs who want to study in the West, like the Egyptian Al-Tahtawi, drew a very bright picture of Europe, and the missionary schools established in the region also contributed to this bright picture. This naive thinking towards the West has probably contributed, in my view at least, to some extent to the Arab decision to stand with Britain and France against the Ottoman Empire during the First World War. Arabs believed in the promises of the Allied forces that they will grant them freedom and the establishment of an Arab state in all Arab region if Arabs fought the Ottoman state. This resembles a major change in the Arab mind because of the twinning of the Arab culture with Islam. To fight the Ottoman Muslims and to ally themselves with the European Christians meant a big shift in the Arab thinking. Perhaps the declaration of Sharif Hussein of Mecca before the Arab revolts against the Turks in 1916, that we are Arabs before we are Muslims, is a good example of the changes that were taking place in the Arab mind that period. But the paradox of this is that when the Arabs declared the revolt in 1916, in that same year, the British and the French diplomats, Sykes and Picot, with some Russian presence, were planning to divide the region, which today includes Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq. But when the Bolshevik Revolution disclosed the secret agreement and published it in the Russian Pravda in 1917, Arabs were assured by Britain not to be worried, considering it as a propaganda from the Ottomans to divert Arabs from their allies. In my view, the Sykes-Picot Agreement has established the base of an Arab distrust and even hatred toward the West. Arabs view that Europe betrayed them when they trusted them. This attitude has become stronger with the establishment of the State of Israel and the Western support for Israel. Now, the question is, what are the reasons which made Britain and France practice this policy? I think this can be explained by the British knowledge of the impact of the Arab Enlightenment period and the growing of Arab nationalistic sentiments, where a great deal of the debates about it took place in Egypt, which was a British colony since 1882. They know that the region is homogeneous in many ways. There is a common language spoken by all Arabs and a religion which connects the vast majority of them. And these two factors are enough to lay the ground of a strong Arab state in the region, which fears the imperial powers which decide to eliminate its possibility to come in life. In his informative article, The Origin of Imperial Israel, Andrew Marshall digs into the root of the conflict in the Middle East. Marshall writes about the concern of the British Prime Minister Champel Bannerman about the future of the Imperial Britain. The answer of his concern was laid by British strategists, which recommends a number of measures, which were realized later in the document known as Sykes-Picot in 1916, or officially known as Asia Minor Agreement. The major ideas of the Champel-Bannerman recommendation can be summarized in three major points. First, to promote division in the area in order to create weak states. Second, to prevent any potential unity in the region. And thirdly, to establish a buffer state. These recommendations were made in 1907 when the Ottoman Empire was still the ruler in the region. But then called the sick man of Europe, and European diplomats in the Ottoman state had power much more than the Ottoman officials themselves. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, officially known as the Asia Minor Agreement, was a secret agreement between the governments of the United Kingdom and France with the assist of Russia, dividing the Arab Orient into spheres of influence for these countries and thus transforming the region into artificial states under the influence of these two powers. In 1917, this agreement was followed by the Balfour Declaration, which promised Palestine to be a homeland for Jews without considering in reality the hopes and the desires of the native population of Palestine. The connection between both declarations is very obvious. Without Sykes-Picot recommendation, there would be no Balfour Declaration. Both declarations belong to the same mindset stated in the recommendation of Champel-Beyrouan recommendation in 1907 and the Sykes-Picot in 1916. It's obvious that the carve up of the region by the imperial powers was a successful policy of divide and rule principle. Its result was a catastrophe for the whole region, which is still paying until this moment. The political impact of the agreement was indeed disastrous for the whole region for several reasons. First, it deprived Arabs from the right of self-determination, which includes the establishment of an Arab state in the Arab-speaking region. Second, it opens the road towards Balfour Declaration and the establishment of a Zionist state in Palestine in 1948. The establishment of the Zionist state in the region has led to the weakening of what I call baby democracy in the Arab region and the emergence of the military regimes as a response to the challenge made by Israel. This too has led to the spread of culture of war and violence in the region. And since 1948, about 12 major and middle wars have taken place in the region. It also hindered development and increased poverty, which benefited the ideas of extremism. It also weakened the culture of civil societies in the Arab region, or hindered it from existing in others. But the most dangerous thing that it has led to the emergence of the Islamic fundamentalism, which was fed by poverty, the culture of war and despotism, and the humiliation Arabs fell under the defeats in the wars with Israel. In addition, that fundamentalism saw in Israel the model of the Jewish state which can be imitated. It has also affected greatly the negative sentiments toward the West, which is seen by the average Arabs as hypocrites and double standard. Third, the agreement destroyed the social fabric which was established in thousands of years. It sometimes put the same family in two different countries with different nationalities. But the most affected among the population is the Arabic Christians in the region. At the times of Sykes-Picot, the Arab Christians was estimated to be from 25 to 30% of the population in the region. Fourth, it has destroyed the traditional commercial routes which have gone on since the dawn of history, which naturally has negative impact on the economical development in the region. Fifth, it created artificial states which later invented history for each to legitimize its existence. The thinking of dividing the region and to hinder any unity continued to be the policy of Britain and France. In 1956, both countries alongside Israel attacked Egypt which was the base of the pan-Arab ideology. The same policy continued with Israel to weaken Arabs and to dominate over the region. Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, has spoken about the necessity to establish sectarian religious states in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Egypt, where the Jewish state would be the strongest overall. At the time when the civil war are taking place now in Iraq and Syria, in addition to other Arab countries, the rumors about a new Sykes-Picot agreement has become much circulated in the media. Much of the analysis is predicting that the USA, alongside Israel, are planning to establish small sectarian religious states in Syria and Iraq. How much this is true, it's difficult to say at the moment, but a major difference now in the times of the Sykes-Picot is that the civil wars are promoting divisions on the ground and hatred among the various sects, the Sunni and the Shia in particular. This atmosphere of bitter civil wars raise serious concern about that the division this time has some legitimacy due to the conflict on the ground. The Western powers and the State of Israel are helping directly and indirectly the ideas of fundamentalism to spread in the region. The Western support to Israel occupation and to the Arab dictatorship in the region has empowered the most extreme ideas to circulate, especially in the poor areas which lost hope to end. The current situation is somehow in the region is somehow similar to the situation of the 1916. The states are disintegrating and the superpowers and Israel are active in reshaping the region to fit their interests, following Julius Caesar principle, divide and rule. Sadly to end, the Middle East has entered a dark stage of its history, which may last for many years. Thank you very much.